right. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all here. And thank you for being here. My name is Lynn Stillings. I'm here with Haran Abbey, and we are the Ashinaga USA team. Um, Joining us shortly will also be Luisa Duarte Silva, who's been advising our work since the inception of Ashinaga USA in 2014. We also have many friends of Ashinaga and some of our board members. Most importantly, we have many of our students and our graduates here. Hi, everyone. As most of you know, Ashinaga USA, we have a two-pronged mission. First, we select brilliant students like the ones we have here today from countries across sub-Saharan Africa. We advocate for them to receive full scholarships at universities in the US, and we're very proud to say that we are good at that part of our mission. The second part of our mission is to help these amazing individuals who hit the ground running at university. They're very successful students. For them to have the opportunity to return to their home countries and their communities with important jobs and leadership positions. And it's in this part of the mission where we need your help. So we're hosting this webinar series to bring together inspiring professionals from the continent and the diaspora in various areas of interest who can not only network with each other, but also inspire our students and graduates who are attending. These webinars will focus on a range of topics from banking and money transfer, technology and agriculture, logistics and healthcare access, and more. So we have two asks of our audience. We're seeking inspiring mentors who might enjoy connecting to one or more students and guide their professional development in a way that you see fit. And we would be grateful for internship opportunities on the continent, which would allow these young leaders to remain connected to professional networks at home during their summer breaks. So we're seeking your support in inspiring these young people to become successful professionals who will contribute to their home communities by showing up as ethical and innovative leaders. And our dream is that they will learn from being immersed in a different society, like here in the US, and yet remain proud ambassadors of their own heritage through and through. We hope that they will be servant leaders who can discern what to absorb from a different culture, what to reject, and what to adapt to the African context with creativity and innovation. And for anyone interested in understanding our recruitment process, how we prepare the students to be successful at university, how we secure these scholarships, please send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat shortly. I'd be happy to set up a meeting and explain our work in more detail. I will now invite Hiran to introduce our guest speaker.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn. So firstly, I would like to thank our board of directors for putting together this webinar series and for the relentless encouragement. We'd also like to acknowledge Darren Shaw's support in spearheading the 2026 webinar series and connecting us to our esteemed keynote today. I would like to quickly ask our students, our Ashinaga scholars and graduates to please wave to the group and to add their names, emails, and LinkedIn and areas of interest on the chat. Thank you all. We are honored to feature Ms. Seema Dhanani as today's keynote speaker on the topic of success reimagined, why the future is being built in Africa. We are in for a treat as we listen to her journey and the impactful work she does at British International Investment. I'm going to give a brief overview. Um, so Seema has led the East African Mission for British International Investment, BII, from a strategic and operational perspective since November 2019. She is responsible for BII's exciting portfolio and origination efforts across infrastructure, financial services, and corporates, as well as all stakeholder relationships. Seema is an NED on the board of Africa Logistics Properties and the Africa Power Platform prior to BII. Seema was the Chief Representative Officer for East and West Africa at Mauritius Commercial Bank, responsible for governance and client coverage. During her earlier years, Seema spent 18 years with the Standard Chartered Bank in a variety of roles across Singapore, London, and Nairobi through various disciplines. She was the founding member of an 18 billion leveraged credit fund, head of strategic directorate within the Group of CEOs office, and executive director for strategic promoter initiatives within East Africa. Seema is a CFA Charterholder and has a BA in Law and Business Studies from the University of Warwick, United Kingdom. She is married and has two children. Seema, welcome. You have the floor, and we'll have ample of time at the end of your presentation for a Q&A as well.
Thank you very much, everyone, and a special thanks to Thiren for inviting me and for the Ashinaga team in particular for allowing me the privilege to speak to you all today. And I really do believe for me it is a huge privilege to be here with you and just guide you through my journey. And I really do hope that some of what I have to say resonates with you all and you take a little bit from it. Is it possible to get my slides up? Lovely, thank you. I think we can flip to the second one if that's possible. Great. So I just wanted to really take you through my journey and what I thought success was when I was growing up. You know, for me, it was really, and I'm just going to hit it straight, was about money. It was about capital. It was about big cities, London, New York, Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong. These were all the places that I felt that deals got done where, it was all about numbers and where people sort of wore their ambition like a badge on themselves. It sort of was a lot of talk around investment banking and trading floors and being a hotshot lawyer. It meant sort of having it all, not just from a work perspective, but also I wanted a husband who was equally driven and hungry for career and success. I wanted the family and I wanted the house and the holidays. So that was my very narrow view of what success looked like. And if I am very honest with you about where that picture really came from, I think it was, well, I thought at the time it was really about my passion. And I thought that was being true to myself. But it took me nearly 20 years to understand that ultimately it came from a place of financial insecurity, from watching my parents struggle, and from very early on me deciding that I never wanted to be in that position. And at the time, I really felt that sort of money was the only answer to all of this and was going to be my sort of gateway and path forward. And so some of what I wanted to share with you all today is actually how I was truly wrong. And whilst all of this, all of the things that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen are necessary and important to some extent, it doesn't need to be what drives you. And I thought I would start by just telling you my journey and where I've come from, and to hopefully build up a picture of really why I had this vision of success and how that actually changed over time. I think we can take this slide down now. Thank you. So I'm the child of East African Asian immigrants. You may or may not have an appreciation of what that means, but my grandparents were brought over to East Africa by the British to build the railways. When they were young boys, actually, both my paternal and maternal grandparents, they must have been somewhere between sort of 8 and 12 or 13 years old. My mother grew up in a very small town in a place called Jinja in Uganda, and her father ran a small haberdashery shop. He worked really hard and built, something from very little. My father's family were from Nairobi. My dad spent most of his time playing marbles on the streets of a small suburb called Ngara. He rarely went to school. He flunked most of his exams. But fortunately for him, his family had a soap factory. And this was back in the 1940s and 50s, which did really well, actually, until the mid-60s, when one of his many cousins swindled all the money from the business. So it saw the whole business that had been built over, a number of generations crumble. And I think for him, he realized that with no education, he really had nothing to fall back on. So I guess all this to say, my parents' generation really inherited three things. I guess I could say hustle, uncertainty, and a very clear message that education is everything, because everything else can be taken away from you. But when you've gained your education, that will stick and it will get you through. So going back a bit, in the 1970s, when Idi Amin expelled the Asians from Uganda, my mother's family fled to the UK, and eventually my parents followed. They arrived with almost nothing in the UK. They stayed with friends from, one house to another. My brother was about 5 or 6 years old at the time. And eventually, over time, they slowly worked their way to an area in North London to be closer to family and managed to build a community. My father got a stable job at a finance company. My mum often worked 3 or 4 different jobs: personal assistant, admin clerk, librarian, etc. And by the time I came along, they'd probably been in the UK for about a decade. And I must say they were certainly on a much more sort of stable footing. But I think the important thing here was that the stories of what it had actually taken for them to get there never left them. And to some extent, even though I wasn't around at the time, they also haunted me. And of course, there was also an added factor was the Indian family dynamic. And for those of you, and many of you with, either African or Asian heritages, you know exactly what I'm about to say. Career options were fairly straightforward: accountant, lawyer, doctor. That was the list. It stopped there, and you picked one of those, and that was it. There was nothing outside of that. And the measuring stick, which I'm sure some of you will resonate with, it was always about other people's children or your cousins or friends of the family, sometimes people you've never heard of whose exam results somehow became your problem. So, I just remember coming home and telling my parents that I came second or I came third. I was genuinely really proud of myself. And the first question was, really wasn't well done. It was just who came first. And I know that many of you will resonate with that. It's not that unusual of a story. So it was just never enough to do well. I think the question always was whether someone else had done better. And of course, as you get older in life, you can brush this off and you can laugh about it. But I'll be honest that for me, that voice stayed with me for a very, very long time. And I had, I guess, a constant fear of just not being enough. Probably something that's driven me to where I am today. But after you get to a certain stage, you realize that that fear is still there. So even when you reach enough, it never really goes away from you, and you have to work quite hard to put that aside sometimes. So I made my way to university. I studied law, not because I loved it. I like to argue, and I thought that was what law was about until I saw the reading list and the pile of books that I had to get through. And that was actually when I understood that what they meant by calling it reading law, that when you did a law degree, you had to read law. It was just endless books, no courtroom dramas, and a lot of very long sentences that actually said very little. So, I knew that I would struggle with all of that, but I was also so fearful of what my parents would say, and I just couldn't make the change, and I stuck it out and completed my degree. I graduated in 2000, and fortunately for me at that time, everyone was just smoking money in banking. It was, all about the dot-com era. It still hadn't fully burst then, so we were on a bit of a peak. It was all about trading and doing deals. So I applied to a few banks and also asset managers, and I joined the graduate program at Standard Chartered Bank. I started in risk, which turned out to be quite an insular sort of world, and I wanted something much more external facing, much more collaborative. And so I got the opportunity to join an investment vehicle, a structured investment vehicle that the bank was setting up at the time. I absolutely loved it. We were investing in asset-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, all these funky products. We built it up from nothing to about $18 billion, which just is a crazy number. And then In 2008, I helped take it apart piece by piece during the financial crisis. And that is a story for another day. I'm more than happy to expand on that for those of you that are interested at another time. During the midst of that crisis, I was offered the opportunity to work directly with the group CEO. I was told directly at the time that I shouldn't apply for the role by my line manager, that it wasn't the right thing for me. But I guess I at least on that occasion, I followed my intuition. And I went for it nevertheless. And I really got to see the bank operate at an entirely different level. At that time, Standard Chartered was in 90 countries around the world, employed 80,000 people, and I sat in the engine room amongst all these decision makers, which was just a really incredible experience. It wasn't really what they did, it was about how they thought. That was like my biggest learning experience. It was the way they made the decisions, the things that they considered, and the responsibility they took on in those roles was really quite enlightening. So after my time there, I really was fortunate and to be in a position to choose anywhere actually in Standard Chartered's global network I wanted to be posted. So obviously the first thing in my mind is Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai. They were all on the table, but by then I was a mother. I had one child, I had another on the way, and I was married into a traditional Indian Kenyan family. My husband was not going to allow or wasn't going to follow my career around the world. It just wasn't going to work for our family and really wasn't the done thing in our culture. The only place I could really get him to seriously consider was Nairobi, which was the city that he was born in and where his parents lived. So I guess at that point, most women would be running a mile from their in-laws. I decided to give it a shot, admitting to myself really that I also needed a change. I'd worked 24/7 for a few years with the group CEO, all through my pregnancies, and frankly, I was pretty exhausted. So I just thought this was, something different I could do for 2 or 3 years, and I would be back to London straight after that period. So in 2011, I came to Nairobi, really not because of a grand vision and not because of a particular sort of calling. It was really just a compromise that felt like it would work for me at the time. I guess also the first realization that perhaps I wasn't going to sort of have it all. And I guess one thing that was really important for me to sort of highlight here is, and particularly for the women in the room, but it also applies to everyone, to be honest. I wanted the career and I wanted the family and I wanted the husband sort of running at the same pace as me. And that was the picture I had been sold, the story that I had built in my head. And I guess from what I discovered is that it doesn't really quite work like that. And certainly not for me, not in my culture, not in my marriage. And motherhood, being a wife and the values that I had grown up with, they really pulled in a very different direction to all these ambitions that I had. There were opportunities I couldn't take, trips I didn't go on, exciting things that I had to say no to because something else really needed more from me in that moment. And frankly, it's really not about balance. I hate that word balance. For me, I don't believe it exists. It's really, I guess the only way I can think about it is that it's much more of a movement. It's the ebbs and the flows. Sometimes they were towards my husband and his career, and sometimes towards me. A lot of the time, of course, towards my sort of young children. And what I've learned was that slowly, and certainly not gracefully, is that I needed to allow for those changes and the movement to really occur more smoothly, not to fight every time the sort of tide shifted. I think I really struggled with, every time I couldn't do something or had to say no to something, there was certainly a bit of a grudge in me that and frustration that caused often some friction, that I wish someone had told me just to go with the flow a little bit more, and not to fight it so much. Anyway, back to my story. I worked for Standard Chartered Kenya for a while, another 6 years. I probably stayed much longer than I really should have. I guess for me, it was it was that thing about holding on to something that was familiar, an ability to go back to London with them. I thought I was here for 3 years. It'd been 6 years, and then eventually I moved to MCB, Mauritius Commercial Bank, um, and that was a good grounding place for me. It was an ability for me to sort of take a step back and think about what I really wanted. And for me in that moment, sort of that changed everything for me because 2 years into my role at MCB, I was offered a fantastic opportunity at BII, British International Investment, the UK's development finance institution. And it was really the first time in my career that I was offered this incredible role on one side, but it came with a significant pay cut. And for someone who was, driven by money and made every career move based on that paycheck, it really went against every grain in my body. Everything that I expected of myself. So I really battled for a very long time on what to do and how to take it. My husband actually sat me down and he asked me 3 questions. He said, "What do you want out of life?" Bearing in mind, by this stage, I'm 40 years old and I just still couldn't hack it. I couldn't think of making the change. I was fearful and still tied to this sort of salary and this paycheck at the end of every month. So he said, "What do you want out of life? What are you doing all of this for? And what are you actually going to do with extra money sitting in the bank?" And I know that might come across a little bit strange, but I guess what it made me realize is that I had reached a point where I had enough to do the simple things in life that I wanted to do. Um, he then made me realize that, that my lifestyle wasn't really going to change that much. Yes, I could still have holidays. They may not be as fancy, but I'll still have them. And he actually said to me once that, you probably come home smiling a lot more than your screw face that the kids and I keep seeing every evening when you come home from work at the moment. And that kind of made me sit back and think, oh my God, is this who I've turned into, a different person? That's not what I wanted my children to see. So it really was the first time anyone had asked me to articulate my values and figure out what was really important to me. And I realized that I had never actually thought about them. I had been running so fast towards money, towards security, towards that version of success that I had inherited, or just, that version that I had built up in my own mind, that I had never really, stopped to ask, what is it that I actually believed in? So, of course, as you all know, I took the job. Um, and we can put up the third slide now, because I actually took that role and discovered something really special in East Africa. And what I discovered when I started working in development finance was genuinely what I hadn't expected. I finally understood what banking actually was. I'd spent 12 years in financial markets in London, 12 whole years, and I never really understood it. Not truly. So I understood products and structures and instruments, but I didn't really get the point of it. And when I was in Nairobi, it all became very tangible. Banking is the fundamentals of banking is really about backing businesses that drive our economies in Africa. They are the engines of growth. They're the engines of their communities. I've understood the need for trade flows, for working capital, the absolute centrality of cash, and how important that was for businesses. It was also about understanding things like financial inclusion. The numbers of people who had never had a bank account, never had access to credit, never had insurance, that really was banking. It completely eradicated all the time I'd spent in London, and I finally got to grips with some sort of purpose. And I think the other thing that I found in East Africa was just that the innovation was just rife, and there were so many different types of technology that were filling the gap. And I wanted to just give you a few examples from the BII portfolio. So these are companies here that we've backed. Copper is one. They provide smartphones as well as solar products to customers who pay on a pay-as-you-go basis, so tiny daily installments. And this reaches people who'd never qualify for a conventional loan. And for the first time for many, they introduced solar home systems, which just turn the lights on for people who never had power and electricity, post 7 p.m. Sun King is another one that provides off-grid solar energy to millions of households across the continent. It's clean, it's affordable, it's accessible. And another example is Apollo Agriculture. This is really interesting. They basically pool together everything that a farmer needs from credit, so finance, really good quality inputs. So by inputs, I mean things like fertilizer and seeds. And they also provide insurance. They put that into one digital package and provide it to a small farmer. So he or she has everything they need in one go. So these aren't just sort of niche products for a niche market. They're really filling the basic needs that actually in Western markets were met many, many years ago, decades ago, by governments and by infrastructure and by systems that were built over generations. And actually here, entrepreneurs are building those systems now with real creativity, with real grit, with a deep, deep understanding of their customers that really no outsider can truly replicate. And it's really here that I've learned about doing business, in East Africa and what it really means. It doesn't matter what school you go to. It doesn't matter what your degree says. It really matters. What really matters, I think, is people. Do you understand your customer? Can you build relationships? Can you read a room? Can you earn trust? Do you show up? It's amazing to see how many people in this market have a side hustle. Everyone is trying to make their own way. And, the bias here is always towards execution. It's action. It's real. It's tangible. And it's around, all of this is built around a culture of survival and of real true ambition. And it's just incredible to see many, many people succeeding. And I think that is what has fascinated me. As I said before, I came here for 3 years. I'm now in my 15th year. And it's the environment that excites me as well as the future. If this is the pace at which we're going now, I think we can move leaps and bounds. So going back a little bit to my journey, at BII, I really found myself in a role that I didn't know existed. I didn't know much about development finance, about impact investment or patient risk capital. We can move to the last slide. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to tell you a bit about sort of BII and what the idea behind impact investing and development finance is. On the whole, what we do is to invest in commercial businesses that, make money and are able to generate impact. Often people have traditionally thought of those two being very mutually exclusive. But what we've been able to showcase through our investment portfolio is that they can come in hand. Typically we hear about grants, but grants run out. And if you make an investment, it can keep working for you. It signals to a market that an idea or a business is viable and that there is money to be made and there's a risk that is truly worth taking. Many of the most important investments in Africa are too risky for commercial banks. They're too early for institutional investors and they're too complex for funds. But that's exactly where BII comes in. We come in to de-risk those types of opportunities and get them to the stage where actually we are ready to crowd in other types of capital. There's philanthropists, there's foundations, there's commercial banks, there's insurance companies, there's pension funds. We don't do everything by ourselves, but we need to show that it can be done. We can provide the right mechanisms for others to follow us, and that there is room for everyone, every type of capital, every type of organization, and every motivated entrepreneur who really wants to play a role within this society. So I really think the question is not whether to engage with the continent, it's fundamentally about how to engage. I wanted to close out at least my part of this today with something a bit personal, and say to you that my parents left East Africa in the 70s for what they thought was a better life. They made enormous sacrifices so that I could have the opportunities that they never had. And I'm really deeply, deeply grateful for that. But I came back to a place that they left, and I've built my life here, a meaningful life, on a continent that it is really writing its own story right now. So I guess my message, if I were to give you one, is don't just think about going away for a better life. Yes, go get your education, absolutely. See the world, build your networks, find your voice, but think about coming back, because the people who will build Africa are Africans. Outsiders have good intentions, but they'll never truly understand this continent. As much as I am now a citizen of the continent, I'm now Kenyan. I still don't truly understand some of the way in which things work in this country. And so that is my sort of encouraging voice to you all, is think about where you can play a role. The people I see thriving in the markets that I operate in, and not always the ones with the best CVs or the most prestigious degrees. They're the ones who understand their communities. They build the trust. They show up. The demand in many of our markets is vast. And of course, it's harder. You have to lay the foundations yourselves. You're going to be the ones who build the infrastructure. It's not built for you. And sometimes, it's a sort of very typical phrase that we use. You have to make the road and build the road as you walk on it, but you will get there. You'll get to own that road. You'll get to be a part of something that's genuinely new and that you've been part of creating. I think I spent, in reflection, the first half of my career chasing someone else's definition of success. And I spent years running from financial insecurity without ever stopping to ask really what I valued. And if I can look back, I think success is no longer about money and capital and all those dreams. It's really about alignment with yourself. It's doing work that you believe in a place that needs you, and in a way that you can be proud of. So I think that's the message I'd like to leave for you all right now. And obviously, I'm going to say that Africa is absolutely the most exciting place in the world to be.
Thank you so much, Seema. And I see so many hearts on those final thoughts. I know folks submitted questions when they registered for the Zoom, but anyone in the room have a question for Seema? I see Duran, your hand
Yes,
up.
maybe I'll jump in, Lynn, very quickly. Firstly, Seema, thank you. I think even though,
Thank you, Dhiren.
no, it's my pleasure. I think I had a very strong feeling that the message you'd be sending out would be powerful. And I think that's exactly what you've done. I think talking about your upbringing, the disalignment of success versus what you really wanted, that journey is something that all the students on this call, all the students at Ashinaga, that Ashinaga supported, have gone through that journey. And I think often is the case when they go abroad to universities, it's a big bad world. There's excitement, there's dreams and visions, but sometimes there's also a lot of confusion. And you're not going to find a solution to that immediately, but over time, through experiences, through the people you meet and you network with, you will get there. And this is what Ashinaga, and I think Lynn mentioned this at the very beginning, is that what we're trying to do now is, as a sort of second phase of what we're trying to achieve, is about realigning the students that go abroad to study, to showcase that actually the growth engine of the future is Africa, right? And it doesn't mean if you're from Rwanda, you need to go back to Rwanda. The continent is alive. It's exciting. It's innovative, and there's opportunities. And so I think this is where I think we want to make sure that we have people like yourself who showcase that actually the Singapores, the Hong Kongs, the Londons, and New Yorks isn't the be all and end all. Actually, sometimes going back home, actually you align yourself with your dreams, your visions, and actually have leave an impact and a legacy that's more powerful. So listen, I just want to say thank you. It wasn't a question. I just think that what you said was inspirational to me, and I'm hoping for all the other students. And I'll leave the floor to the others.
Thank you. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Duran, and thank you for introducing us to Seema. Who has a question in our audience?
Hi, I'm Godfrella. I'm an Ashinaga graduate. Thank you, Seema, for your talk. It was very, very relatable because at this point in my life, you have the big goals, or you also want the family, you also want the career. And it was really great hearing a woman speak on this, someone who had the big vision, but also all these other things that they wanted to achieve. I just want to hear from you. I know you spoke a little bit about it, how you had to realign your values, but how did you consolidate having these big career goals, but having also family goals that were super important to you? How did you consolidate that to a point where it was not just, oh, I regret giving this up for this? How did you go about that?
I think sometimes I still consolidate. There are moments where I look at stuff and meet people from my past and look at where they've reached. And I know that, that could have been me. But I quickly turn back and look at what I've achieved, look at what my family and figure out what's most important. And I think the only way to do that is to have, and I'm sorry if I'm sort of repeating myself a little bit, it was to be clear on what my values were. And it doesn't, I guess I realized that to have a happy home and to be present for my kids would stump any career, you know, and to as long as I could, have a healthy home and happy marriage, that was also equally important to me. Again, above the next career move, because ultimately, I've seen this happen to friends where they realize too late that you're just a number in an organization, especially some of the larger sort of corporates. When it comes to retrenchment, you are just a number when the world changes very quickly. And so you have to really judge when you give all to your work and when at the times when your family and your personal life need you more. And so it's never to sacrifice that if that is indeed what is important to you. So again, I go back, if you list your values and your family and your be it your parents or your siblings, it doesn't have to be children and husband or wife, whatever it is, if that's what's important to you, constantly reflect when you're in those moments of dilemmas. What shall I do? What's more important? And sometimes you will sacrifice them. That's okay too, but you just got to know and be aware that these are the really important things to you. So you can sacrifice for a short time, but you will ultimately be truly unhappy with yourself if you do it for too long, right? If you give up too much for too long, because you need your value system to draw you back for you to be inherently stable and content with yourself as you go into sort of your future. I don't know if that really answers it, but I know that that's the technique I use now. I write down, and your values will change. They won't always stay consistent. I write down the top 3 things. What's important for me right now? What are the things that are grounding me? What are the things that I must not compromise on? And whatever the change or the role or the thing that's going on that I need to make a decision on, I look at that in comparison to those values and see if I'm aligned or not. I need to have 2 out of those 3 ticked, right? And know where I stand on the third. So I think that's been a really helpful technique for me. And I still get it wrong. I still have to be drawn back. I hope
Thank-
that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Godfrella, for your question.
Thank you, Seema. That was helpful.
Raju, question from you.
Hi, Seema. My name is Raju, and I'm a Mauritian working as an economist at the MCB. So it's a pleasure to meet an ex-colleague. I have 2 quick questions. The first one is, would you please share about your experience with the CFA and how it opened doors for you? And secondly, what key skill would you think someone would need to have as a young professional aiming for a global coverage job like the one you had at MCB?
Sure. So the CFA, I remember having to fight to get it paid for. It was just really beginning to take off as one of those sort of credible-ish qualifications that you would, one did in the investment sort of landscape. So I fought to have my first level 1 paid for by Standard Chartered, and then they were like, no, 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 we're done now. That's it. You don't need it anymore. It wasn't a thing, at that time. And then eventually, I think, luckily for me, I really pushed really hard because I felt like I needed something after university. A lot of people talk about MBAs. That was never going to happen for me. And so I was like, what else can I do that sort of roots me in this space that I'm really beginning to enjoy? And it was really relevant to what I was doing. So I think that helped me somewhat. When I look back now at the doors that it's opened, I don't know if I'm best placed to sort of answer that. I think it really does help. A lot of people in finance look for the MBAs. And I always think that that's entirely unfair. I mean, great if you're able to do it, and if you're able to take time and you're able to fund it. It just wasn't a position I found myself in. So it is helpful to do something technical, and it doesn't have to be the CFA. It can be there's many other technical sort of qualifications you can have. But I do think it has, there's been many meetings that I've walked into where people have said, "Oh, you're CFA," and I say yes. And you just get you get a vibe from them that they appreciate it, or they have an understanding of the rigor it takes to go through that process. So it's become much, much more popular now. But I think it's important to try and do something technical post your undergrad. And it can be anything that's relevant to your field. It's even better if it's relevant to what you're doing, because it just makes it much, much more enjoyable while you're working to be able to study something that you can relate to on a day-to-day basis. So it doesn't have to be the CFA, it can be many other things, but very useful to show that you've done something. And in terms the skill set of taking on a global role, I think a lot of it still comes down to relationships and people. Once you have a job in a large corporate, I don't think it's necessarily, how how ultra well you perform that role always. You've got to be good at your job, but you don't need to be doing 120% to get the next role. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think you can do 80, 90% of your job really well, but make sure that you network, that people know who you are, that you put your hand up for different things, that you're out there doing different things and you're connecting with people in your sphere, externally as well as internally. So yes, the fundamentals of doing a good job and being good at what you do, they must be there. But you really have to work on the rest of it as well. Again, it comes down to relationships. They're so important. And I know, we live in this world of AI, and we live in, and I've got mine out here, my phone's right in front of me. It is the world of distraction continuously. But fundamentally, we exist as human beings, and that connection you'll never be able to beat. It's how you'll get recommended for different jobs. I'm recruiting for a 6 months secondment for BII and it's an internal role at the moment. And I want someone to come out to Nairobi to fill a gap I have for 6 months. I'm just calling people I know internally and saying, hey, who's good in your team? Who do you rate? Who could do this role that requires, you know, not to be a specialist in one area, but to kind of, be broad, and who's going to be able to sit in front of a high commissioner and an embassy or an ambassador and yet, the next day make coffee for a guest. Who's going to have that bandwidth to be able to do that and the humility to do that? That's the type of people I want to know. So hopefully that gives you an idea. It really is about being a good person, being out there, and just building strength in your relationships. You really can't knock it. Maybe I'm being old school, but it worked for me.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
Thanks for your question, Raju. Do we have other questions from the audience? I have one that a student sent. She asked, what advice can you give to students who have a strong passion for change?
I would say, just dial into it somehow, right? If you are someone who's sitting there and wants to fight for something, and believes things need to be different, is just to do your best to put yourself in a position where you're able to drive that somehow. Like, it, I think that can be quite rare, to find people who, we all believe in change and we all know change needs to happen. And, but if you're someone who will zone into it and will lean into it and really wants to be the one to put their hand up and stick their neck out to make that change, then they really need to, build the community around them that's going to support them to do that, whatever it takes, because it's that passion that will see them through for sure. Obviously, it depends on what the change is, but at the end of the day, you need to. That feels like it's coming from a place. That question feels like it's coming up from a place of someone who really believes in something. So certainly, I would say just dial in hard and go for it. We're seeing, and I guess from a contextual perspective, we're seeing change happen every minute here. Things are moving so incredibly fast. Entrepreneurs who have ideas, just an idea, are making things transform, systems transform, which is just phenomenal. So you're sort of seeing things happen and change, being affected very quickly on the continent.
There was another question submitted that I think relates to what you said at the end of your talk, that Africans are building the future of Africa. And this person asked, how important is changing the attitude towards Africa's potential in creating opportunities for growth on the continent?
That's an interesting one. I'm not going to lie and say perception doesn't matter, because it does. As much as I don't like it, it does matter. So I guess in line with that, changing attitudes are important. But the only way to truly do that is to stop talking about it and demonstrate it. And I think that I would like to think that in the work that BII does, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to demystify the perception that Africa is too risky a place to do business or to make an investment. I think it's much, much more about understanding the risks, having a deep knowledge of what it takes to mitigate those risks, and then making the investment and seeing that scale and grow and showcasing where it has worked. So yes, perception matters, attitudes matter, they need to change. But by just talking, we're not going to be able to change anything. It is about a demonstration effect. So it's about showing how things can move and really shouting out loud when we do achieve things, because we do. I think there are many, many examples that we don't talk about in the world. One of the things that, as Kenyans, we're very proud of is M-Pesa, mobile money technology that just, hands down beats anything we see anywhere else in the world. And it really works. And it has changed the lives from a financial inclusion perspective of millions of people. Because you've got individuals who now effectively have a bank account, who now through their M-Pesa account are building credit history. That doesn't happen. And the fact that that technology came from here is incredible. But it's only people who, have somewhat of a knowledge of the continent or of the East African region know about M-Pesa. We don't shout out enough about it. I think I've seen something in the chat.
It's a question from Helen. Thank you so much for telling us your inspiring story. My question is, you said that Africa is the future. We should come back and invest. However, as you might know, there are lots of wars and struggles in Africa, especially as an Ethiopian in Ethiopia. If we invest here and get our investments ruined in every war, wouldn't that be challenging? Have there been any such challenges you faced in your prime time?
If that is asking, have we lost money, then yes. But it's a sort of a different story. As an institution, we're here to take risk, and risk means you win some and you lose some, frankly. But I absolutely understand that there are many, many countries on the continent that just don't have the right environment to make those investments that you might wish to. And I think, as Dhiren mentioned, that it's not just about going home to the specific country that you were born in. If you can, phenomenal and wonderful. But there is so much that relates to, many of the neighboring countries. And not all of them are suffering in the same way. So I still think that if you have the passion for your continent and for your countries, there's a way that you can make a difference by just, being close to home. There are networks and communities in neighboring countries that are so rife. I have a couple of colleagues in my office here who are from Ethiopia, and one of them used to work for the IFC in Washington, D.C., and wanted to move back home, as close to home as possible. And she didn't feel like Ethiopia had enough for her at the time. And she came to Nairobi, but she's built a community around her. And together, they're able to make changes back home. Together, they make investments in different things back in Addis. So, that's just one example of someone who hasn't been able to go home for whatever reasons, but is still making a difference and making an impact. And actually, I think feels more aligned to her kind of, her values and her sort of roots just by being close by.
Great. Thank you, Seema. I know we're coming up on the hour. maybe we can take, I see Lakshana's hand is up. We've got some questions in the chat, but I think we'll let Lakshana ask her
Hi,
question.
Seema. Thank you so
Hi.
much. It was very inspiring to hear about your journey. I'm Lakshana, and I'm also from Mauritius, and I like MCB. My question for you was that you mentioned earlier that in large organizations, you are just a number. So I was wondering, like, how do you feel fulfilled by being in a large company? Like, I know through the company, like, you're making change. But still, like, have you ever felt like small by being part of a large company?
Yes, I think I have, and I haven't really realized it. But if I look back on my career, I started at Standard Chartered with 90,000 people or 80,000 people. Then I went to MCB, which was a few thousand people. And then I've moved to BII and we have like 800 people. So maybe it's not by design by any means, but maybe it's a path I've chosen because I think that you can get lost in in a large organization. But I guess just to clarify what I was saying is ultimately when you're dealt with the dilemmas of choice and when you're choosing, work in a big institution in a big, you're a small cog in a big wheel versus something that fundamentally goes against your values or goes against, what your family needs at that particular point in time, just always have this thing that will remember that, you know, typically a corporate institution can let you go very easily. I'm not saying that happens to everyone, but you just need to have that in the back of your mind when you're faced at points when you have a dilemma about which way to go. And the things, when you're being pulled in different directions. I think it's been really important for me personally to realize actually, you know what, as much as this presentation is incredibly important and this deadline is critical. I have a crying child and I need to deal with them because that's what's most important in that moment. And my son was or is neurodiverse, and so I would have him throwing fits while I'm trying to speak online and Zoom during COVID. And I literally had to say, I would never have done this before, but I had to say, I'm sorry, guys. I need to go offline for 10 minutes because he needed my attention in that moment. And maybe before that would have been seen as something just that is a no can do, but I've had to make that choice in that moment. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say when it comes to sort of bigger organizations, that when you're making these choices, just remember it's a job, and remember what's most important for you in your life, and make those decisions wisely. I haven't always made those decisions well, and that's why I can sit here and tell you now. I've often put work in front of my family, and I wish I hadn't. I wish I'd taken a break at certain points in time when my kids needed me more.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Lakshana. Seema, we are at the hour and I want to be respectful of your time. We want to thank you and thank you everyone for being here. I know there were a couple questions in the chat. Would it be okay if maybe if any of our students have follow-up questions, if we might be
I'm
able to
happy
put
to
them in touch
answer.
with you?
Yeah,
Awesome.
please do. Please do. I'm more than
Okay.
happy to answer them. And yeah, if you can send me a download of the chat, I'll get back to everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause for Seema. I think we've got some really incredible
Thank you.
takeaways from this talk as a woman working in corporates, as Godfrella said, your values kind of leading your decision making in your career, and the future of Africa being built by Africans, our amazing students here. Thank you so much for
I
this
want to see some
inspiring
of your
talk.
students, in the headlines in a few years. That'll be really worthwhile.
Oh, they will be. Future presidents, future CEOs, that's
Absolutely.
them. Thank you so much, Seema.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you,
Really
everyone,
appreciate
for
your time.
joining.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Seema.
Have a great
Seema.
day,
Thank
everyone.
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.